On a Tuesday afternoon in October of 1988, the lobby of a private training facility in Burbank, California held 31 people, not an audience, not a crowd. 31 working professionals in the martial arts and film industry who had come for a scheduled demonstration and stayed longer than any of them planned. The man who had called the meeting was 37 years old, 6 feet 4 inches tall, 232 pounds of legitimately trained muscle built across a decade of Aikido study under some of the most demanding instructors in the world. He had a black belt, he had a film deal, he had a reputation that had been printed in 4 different trade publications in the preceding 18 months, each one using words like unstoppable and genuine, and the real thing. He had walked into that facility 30 minutes early, which is what men walk into rooms early for, to own the room before anyone else arrives. His name was Steven Seagal. In the next 11 seconds, everything he believed about himself would be tested in front of every person who mattered to his career. Nobody in that lobby knew they were about to watch a man discover the distance between his reputation and his ability. Steven Seagal had not always been easy to dismiss. That is the important thing to understand before any of what follows makes sense. He had trained seriously. He had spent years in Japan, studying under teachers who did not give belts to people who asked nicely. He had opened his own dojo. He had taught law enforcement. When he arrived in Hollywood, he arrived with credentials that most action stars manufactured in a makeup chair. His were earned, or at least earned enough that the people around him believed them, and belief is its own kind of currency in rooms where reputations are the product being sold. By the autumn of 1988, he was being positioned as something new. Not a stuntman who could act, not an actor who could do a few kicks, a genuine martial artist who was also camera ready. The industry people in that room had come because his producing team had set up a demonstration, a controlled display of technique. Throws, joint locks, the kind of thing that gets you a greenlit picture if the right people are watching with the right expression on their faces. The demonstration had gone well. Seagal moved with the ease of a man who had done these things 10,000 times in a room by himself, which is exactly what genuine training looks like. The people watching took notes. Conversations were being had in the back corner of the lobby in low voices that had the sound of deal-making inside them. And then someone made an introduction that nobody had planned for. He was sitting in the 4th row of folding chairs that had been set up along the east wall. He was wearing a gray t-shirt, dark trousers, and a pair of shoes that cost less than the parking validation at the building across the street. He was 48 years old, though he looked older in the flat afternoon light coming through the high windows. He was not there as a guest of honor. He was there because a mutual contact had mentioned the demonstration, and he had nothing on his calendar that afternoon that could not be moved. His name was Chuck Norris, and no one in the room introduced him as such, because in rooms like that one, in that decade, in that city, his name introduced itself to anyone paying attention. Seagal was in conversation near the center of the room when the introduction reached him. He turned. He looked at the man in the gray shirt in the 4th row. He said something in a register low enough that only the 3 people nearest to him heard it clearly. Of those 3 people, one of them, a stunt coordinator named Ray Ortega, who would later describe the afternoon in a recorded interview, reported the words with the same specificity each time he told the story. What Seagal said was this: "I know who he is. He would not last 1 round with me."
Not one. Ortega said he did not respond. He said the other 2 people near him also did not respond. He said the words fell into a brief silence and stayed there, which is what certain kinds of statements do when the people who hear them understand immediately that something has just been made inevitable. If you are watching this for the first time, make sure you are subscribed.
And drop a comment below telling us where you are watching from. This story does not end where you think it ends, and you will want to see it through to the last minute. Chuck Norris heard it. He heard it the way men who have trained for 30 years hear things, not with surprise, and not with anger, and not with the specific performance of offense that lesser men put on when their dignity is questioned in public. He heard it the way a man hears his name called from across a room, as a fact, as a thing that had entered the air and now required a response of some kind. He stood up. He did not unfold from the chair with urgency. He did not bounce on the balls of his feet or roll his neck or adjust his clothing in the way men adjust their clothing when they want other men to notice that they are preparing for something. He stood the way a man stands when he is getting up to refill a glass of water. He set his jacket on the back of the chair. He folded it once. He laid it across the seat. He walked toward the center of the room. The 31 people in that lobby had been watching Seagal for 90 minutes. They shifted their attention to the man in the gray t-shirt without discussion. Ortega said later that the shift happened the way attention always shifts when the actual center of gravity in a room reveals itself, row by row, corner by corner, like a current redirecting through still water without being told to. The tournament director present that afternoon, a man named Bill Wallace who required no introduction in any room that contained martial artists, set his coffee cup down on the table beside him. He set it down with deliberate care, the way a man sets something down when he wants both hands free to watch without distraction. Chuck Norris stopped 8 feet from Steven Seagal. He did not speak first. Seagal looked at him. What passed between them in those first few seconds was not threat and counter-threat. It was assessment. Two men who had spent their lives reading other men's bodies the way other people read text, gathering data in the specific quiet before anything physical begins. Seagal said, "You heard that?" Chuck Norris said, "I did." Seagal said, "I meant it as respect. You were something once." Chuck Norris said nothing. This is where understanding the mechanics becomes necessary, because what happened next lasted 11 seconds and contained more information than most men absorb in an afternoon. A fight is not an exchange of strikes. A fight is a conversation about distance, and the man who controls the distance controls every word of that conversation. Seagal knew this. He had built his entire system around it. His Aikido was a distance art, a redirection art, an art that required the opponent to commit and then punish the commitment. To make that system work, he needed Chuck Norris to move toward him. Chuck Norris did not move toward him. Second one, Seagal shifted his weight forward by 3 inches. It was a read, not an attack. A question asked in the language of pressure to see what the answer would be. Chuck Norris's weight did not change. His feet did not move. His hands remained at his sides. His eyes did not leave Seagal's center mass. Second two, Seagal extended his lead hand in what Ortega described as a probing gesture, half reach and half invitation, the kind of motion that in a dojo produces a response that can then be redirected. It reached empty space. Chuck Norris had moved laterally by 6 inches without appearing to move at all. The distance between them had not decreased, it had shifted. Bill Wallace, who had by this point been watching combat demonstrations for 22 years, did not move. Ortega said he had both palms flat on the table now, and was leaning forward by about 2 inches, which was as close to visible reaction as Wallace ever came in a professional setting. Second three, Seagal committed. Not fully, not recklessly, but committed in the way a trained man commits when the probes have returned nothing useful and the situation requires escalation. He moved forward with a technique designed to close the distance and establish a grip that would allow the redirection to begin. His hands were positioned correctly, his footwork was correct, the technique was real, it found nothing. Chuck Norris was no longer where Seagal's hands were going. He had not retreated, he had not blocked, he had not parried, he had placed himself in a position where the technique had no target and he had done it in the time it takes a man to exhale. Second four, Seagal reset. This is the moment Ortega returned to most often in later tellings. He said that watching Seagal reset was like watching a man type a sentence and discover that the page is blank. The motion was there. The training was there. The intention was there. But the page was blank. Second five. The second attempt came lower and faster than the first. The natural adjustment of a trained man who has been denied once and is recalibrating without panic. It was, by every technical standard, a better attempt than the first. Seagal's commitment was deeper. His angle was improved. His follow-through would have been devastating if it had connected with anything other than the specific quality of air that Chuck Norris left behind him when he was no longer there. Near the back wall, a film producer named Gerald Iskov had stopped his conversation mid-sentence. Ortega said Iskov had one hand raised as though he had been making a point to the person beside him, and that hand simply stopped in the air, and the sentence it had been accompanying was never finished. Second 6. Chuck Norris had moved to Seagal's outside, not behind him, not past him, to the outside, at an angle that closed the effective range of every technique Seagal had available to him, and opened a corridor of response that Seagal had no trained answer for. This is what 30 years of sparring at speed produces in a man's body, not the knowledge of what to do, the absence of the need to decide. The body already knows, and it goes. Second 7. Chuck Norris raised his right hand. He did not throw the strike. He placed it. The knuckles settled against Seagal's jaw with the specific gentleness of a man pressing a button. There was no force behind it. There was no need for force. The force was in the position, in the angle, in the demonstration that if the intention had been different, the conversation would have ended there. He held it for 1 second. Then he lowered his hand. He took 1 step back. He was standing 8 feet away again, same as when he had started. The lobby held its silence for a duration that Ortega estimated at 4 seconds but described as feeling considerably longer. He said it had the quality of silence that follows a very loud sound, which is its own kind of strange given that nothing loud had occurred. Seagal did not move immediately. He stood in the position he had been in when the hand was placed, and then removed from his jaw, and he stood there long enough that the people watching understood he was not calculating a response. He was absorbing something. Chuck Norris walked toward him, not away from him, toward him. He stopped 2 feet from Seagal. He extended his right hand, not as a gesture of submission, but as a gesture of completion. The thing was finished, and this was how finished things were acknowledged between men who understood what had just happened. He said something. He said it quietly enough that only Seagal heard it. He said it once and did not repeat it. What he said has been reported differently in different accounts of that afternoon, but Ray Ortega, who was standing close enough to hear the tone if not the precise words, said what Chuck Norris offered Steven Seagal in that moment was not mockery. It was not a lecture. It was something shorter than either. Something that Seagal would carry out of the room and not discuss publicly for several years. Steven Seagal took the extended hand. He shook it. He said, "I take it back." The fork was there, as it always is in moments like that one. He could have said nothing. He could have found a technical explanation that lived in the space between excuse and analysis. The people in the room would have understood the language. They had all used it themselves at one time or another. Instead, he said the simplest thing available to him, the thing that costs the most and requires the most, and he said it in front of 31 people who would carry what they had witnessed out of that lobby and into the next several decades. Bill Wallace retrieved his coffee cup from the table. He did not say anything. He did not need to. His retrieval of the coffee cup was itself a form of commentary. Chuck Norris collected his jacket from the chair in the 4th row. He folded it once over his forearm. He moved toward the door at the same pace he had moved toward the center of the room, which is to say without urgency and without performance. At the door he was stopped briefly by a hand placed on his shoulder. The hand of the stunt coordinator who had been watching from 8 feet away for 11 seconds, and had understood every frame of what he had seen. The touch was brief. It was the kind of touch men offer when they want to confirm that the thing they witnessed was real. Chuck Norris nodded. He left. The 30 people remaining in the lobby of that Burbank facility were quiet for a period that different people estimated differently, but that everyone described as notable. Ortega said the producer with the suspended hand eventually lowered his arm and completed his sentence, but that neither he nor the person he had been speaking with could later recall what the sentence had been about. Over the following months, the story moved through the networks that such stories move through: dojos, studio lots, industry events in rooms where the same 40 people find themselves across 20 years. It accumulated details in some tellings and shed details in others, which is the natural behavior of stories that contain no recording and many witnesses. What did not change across any version of the story was its shape. The lobby, the 31 people, the 11 seconds, the hand placed gently against the jaw, The 2 words spoken in front of everyone, and the shorter words spoken to one man alone. Steven Seagal would go on to make films, successful ones, for a time. He would speak in interviews about his training, about his philosophy, about what genuine martial skill looked like on camera versus in a room. He did not often speak about that Tuesday in October. When he did, and it was rare, he spoke about it briefly and without embellishment. He said he had learned something, he did not specify what, which is either humility or discretion, and those 2 things look enough alike from the outside that the distinction rarely matters. Chuck Norris did not tell the story. He did not reference it in interviews. He did not bring it up in the training rooms where he spent the years that followed. The story belonged to the people who had been in the room, and he left it with them. What endures is not the 11 seconds. 11 seconds is nothing. Men who have spent their lives in training spend millions of seconds doing exactly what those 11 seconds contain. What endures is the choice Steven Seagal made at the end of them. The fork was real and the choice was real, and he chose the harder direction, which is the direction that costs something in the moment and returns something over the years that follow. A man's reputation is not what he tells people about himself, it is what he does when the telling is finished and the room is waiting. Next time, we will look at the afternoon Chuck Norris walked into a judo training session in San Diego uninvited, and what the instructor there said into a phone call 30 minutes later that would echo through the competition circuit for the better part of a decade. That story starts in a place you will not expect, and it ends with a sentence no one who heard it has ever forgotten.